Okay, so I think we're ready to get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Northern Plains Resource Council's 2020 Soil Summit. And first of all, I think we just need to go through some housekeeping details. And if this was a in-person event, usually the first housekeeping detail is to tell people where their bathrooms are, but I don't think we need to do that. Before we get started, I'll just make these announcements. This is a Zoom webinar. This means all participants are automatically muted. This will allow for everyone to better hear our presenters without background noise. All participant video is automatically kept off. This will eliminate any distractions outside of a speaker's presentation. If you're having any technical troubles, please use the chat function. We'll have staff monitoring the chat to help with any technical issues. Question and answer sessions are built into the agenda. To ask a question, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Staff will use it to collect questions and pass them along to the appropriate speaker. While you may submit a question at any time, we will answer your questions during the designated question and answer period. When submitting a question, please identify who your question is directed towards. Please refrain from posting your questions into the chat, and feel free to submit any reactions you may have in the chat. If you would like to see the agenda, you may find it with the Zoom link in your email. A link to the agenda is also available in chat. My name is Steve Charter. I'll be your MC today. I'm a third-generation Montana rancher. My family and I ranch outside of Shepherd, Montana, where we have been practicing and promoting holistic resource management since 1983. My late wife, Jean, and I helped found the Center for Holistic Resource Management, the first group formed to promote the land management practices advocated by Alan Sabert. I served on the first board of directors. My folks helped found the Northern Plains Resource Council, the grassroots conservation and family agricultural group, and the host of our event today. I am a current board member, and I have served as past chairman of the board, and I've been a member for over 40 years. I don't know about you, but my enthusiasm for Zoom meetings is wearing a little thin. I miss being able to directly interact with people. In the past, that's the way we have developed our ideas and plans. But we do what we need to do, and now we need to develop these skills remotely. If you are here participating today in this less than ideal situation, it means you care deeply how we will develop a plan to restore true health to our soil and consequently to ourselves. I am confident that we will leave here today with the tools and inspiration necessary to make a real start reforming our country's soil policies and getting the money and resources to the innovative producers and support systems that will lead to the implementation of these practices. This is the second Soil Summit put on by Northern Plains Resource Council. I believe our first summit, held in 2016, was among the first in the state to push the envelope on regenerative agricultural practices. Since then, there has been many great conferences and field days showcasing the exciting potential and the tremendous benefits of soil health. These gatherings are always fun and inspiring. So why not have the second summit follow up with all the exciting success stories instead of focusing on government policy, which for many people is about as enjoyable as a root canal. Unfortunately, regardless of the amount of education and outreach we do, it won't bring about the change needed to transform our present harmful system to a regenerative one. If we are to realize the scale of change that's needed, we must have major policy reform and have the avenues to help finance this transformation. The widespread embrace of soil management and adoption of healthy soil practices remains elusive. As of 2007, an average of 6.4 tons of topsoil per acre were lost every year due to erosion in Montana, compromising the productivity of agriculture in the state and the stability of our communities. Montana also has the distinction of being the only US state to export its topsoil to 3 different oceans. Worse still, American farmers and ranchers are in crisis. It's becoming increasingly more difficult to make a living off farming and ranching. According to USDA's latest farm census released just last year, less than half of American producers were profitable during a 5-year period between 2012 and 2017. Commodity prices remain at rock bottom, and even when demand increases, like during this pandemic, they remain stuck there. And when farmers and ranchers go under, so do rural communities. Our current conventional practices and economic system did not just naturally evolve. They are not the natural order sent from above. They are the result of deliberate government policy, primarily income insurance, part of crop insurance in the federal farm bill. These practices will remain the dominant ones until these policies change. These policies serve the food monopolies and giant corporations very well, giving them trillions of dollars, masked as payments to the producers. Yet we're seeing more and more every day these policies serve the rest of us, farmers, ranchers, workers, consumers, taxpayers, the land, air, and water very poorly. Corporations have done a good job of keeping these policies in place and have consolidated their political power effectively. Producers are not powerful enough to beat these big guys alone. We are less than 1% of the population. Environmentalists don't have that clout either, nor consumers, taxpayers, or workers. But if we could all get together, maybe. So while implementing regenerative practices on our ranch, I have learned the importance of dung beetles in regenerating the land. Over the years, we have been able to greatly increase their numbers. I have been closely observing them. These are just my rancher informal observations and have absolutely no scientific validity. So I've actually learned some dung beetle communication that I believe has some pertinence here. We have many species on our place, and a few of these are the ones that you see rolling balls of dung. So these rollers divide the job up between the males and the females. The males gather the dung, preferring the excrement of bulls for some reason, and brings it to the female. The female digs a hole, lays the eggs, and then stacks the dung balls the male brings to the hole. When she thinks she has enough dung for the hole, she signals the male with a wiggle of her antenna, like this, which literally means, I have had enough of your bullshit. So now that we know a little dung beetle language, I would like everyone to join me and go like this, 2 fingers on the forehead, and wiggle to inform the powers that be that we have had enough of their BS. Now we'll move into our session on national soil health policy. Soil health is a growing topic among agencies like USDA and NRCS. Here in Montana, our state NRCS has worked to come up with a comprehensive soil health strategy for the state, but there's more work to be done. Our first 2 speakers are going to talk about a national comprehensive soil health strategy and will detail provisions of existing legislation that could advance soil health. Now, to open our session, I'm pleased to introduce Wayne Honeycutt, the president and CEO of the Soil Health Institute. Wayne previously served for 5 years as the deputy chief for science and technology with USDA NRCS in Washington, D.C., where he led programs in technology, acquisition, development, and transfer to ensure NRCS conservation practices reflect the latest scientific advances for conserving our nation's soil, water, air, plant, animal, and energy resources. Wayne served as a research soil scientist for 14 years and a research leader for 10 years with the USDA Agriculture Resource Service New England Plant, Soil, and Water Laboratory, where he led and conducted interdisciplinary research on carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus cycling and sustainable cropping systems development. In those roles, he led national research teams for predicting nutrient availability, developed procedures adopted by ARS for enhancing national research coordination, and received regional and national awards for technology transfer. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Wayne Honeycutt.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here and get us rolling. Hopefully everyone can see that good. All right, hearing no objections, I guess you all are seeing it okay. Thanks for everyone for the opportunity to visit with you today. And I'll remember to wiggle my antenna and try not to spread too much of that BS, Steve, that you were describing. I wanted to tell you that, I visited with Dwayne, the next speaker, and we both learned that we had some similar thoughts on what we wanted to talk about when it came to talking about some federal policy. And so I thought, well, maybe it would be better for me to kind of back away from that topic and instead to talk to you a little bit about a national strategy for adopting soil health. And so this is a strategy that we've developed at the Institute, but something that we offer for everybody to engage in and to adopt themselves if it rings true for them. I would start off saying it's very clear, and I'm sure this is not news to any of you, that adopting soil health practices and systems can be really beneficial for water quality, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, increasing carbon sequestration, providing pollinator habitat. But if we're going to provide all these environmental and natural resource benefits, then it's really going to be dependent on our farmers and ranchers to adopt these systems and provide these environmental benefits for the rest of us. And that's where our great opportunity, of course, is with soil health, is that these same systems can help them build drought resilience and reduce inputs and things like that and stay profitable. But again, it's really going to be all about adoption, and that's why we start off with our strategy with adoption as our goal, and really just ask ourselves, what does a producer need to know when he or she decides whether or not to adopt these systems? And of course, the first piece of information they often tell us that they need is information on the business case. Is it profitable? Will it increase or reduce their economic risk? But then they also tell us they need information on how to measure it. It's really kind of unfair of us to ask producers, any landowner, to manage something if we can't really tell them how to measure their progress and how far they're going with that management. Then beyond that, it seems like we feel like that they need more localized soil health training. And I won't go into grand detail right here, but I would just say that it very much does need to be localized because kind of the fundamental ways, all soil biology and all biology itself is also local. But what backstops a lot of that is a firm research and development program, not just for the business case, but for the education training programs, et cetera. But so once we get all of these, and even when we start to get greater and greater adoption, we feel like it's important that we don't stop there, but that we really quantify the impacts of that adoption, because impacts on things like productivity will support the business case, but impacts on things like carbon sequestration and water quality, well, that will really help us inform our policies and help us provide the evidence that we need, not only for policies, but will give us that ammunition that we need for on the environmental benefits for informing consumers of those environmental benefits. Because what we really want to achieve is more market demand that not only ties back into that business case, but we want it to really kind of be a self-sustaining system where the consumer is demanding the food and the fiber and the fuel that's grown using these soil systems because of those environmental benefits, because of the support for farmers in rural communities. And to the extent that our research hopefully will one day show it, those food nutrient density benefits of the food that's grown using these soil health systems. So this is our overall strategy, and as I mentioned, it's offered for anyone, everyone to use. And we have projects at the Soil Health Institute in each of these boxes, and I'm just going to touch on them just a little bit here. So when, for example, I'm talking about measurement, then you can see, from this diagram how it kind of fits into that overall national strategy. When I'm talking about policies, you'll see how that fits in. So please try to kind of keep this in mind. So first one, just jump into, just very going to touch on lightly, is measurements. I would say there's a lot of different types of soil health measurements out there, and there's for good reason, because there's a lot of different soils and a lot of different tests and different methods and different crops and climates, and that's kind of the issue, is the different soils and crops and climates really influence the results on how you might determine what is an effective test. And so we really wanted to answer this question for everyone, so that everyone can use a standardized approach for measuring soil health. And so the way that we're doing that is we've gone to 124 long-term research sites across the US, Canada, and Mexico. And these are sites where they have the appropriate experimental design to allow them to come to the appropriate statistical conclusion of how effective each measurement is. And so at each of these sites, they are comparing a conventional system with a soil health management system in a replicated design. And so we have gone to these 124 sites and sampled them, and have evaluated them for over 30 different measures of soil health. And I have a team of scientists right now, 8 scientists, that's analyzing all that data. We expect by early to late winter, hopefully not early spring, I do think it'll be this winter, that we'll be able to announce what the most effective measurements is, or what subset of those 31 that we evaluated is the most effective for everyone to use. So those of you in Montana struggling with this issue, I would say, please be patient. We think we're going to be able to come out with a recommendation for everyone to use. The business case is kind of a hard nut to crack, because every farm is different. And so we're looking at, we are developing these enterprise budgets or partial budgets, not only the long-term research sites where the replication could give us a handle on variability, but then we're also interviewing farmers. We've just finished interviewing 125 farmers across 20 states. We know that still leaves 30. But we think it's a good start. We do know that different regions, different states, because of that localization of biology, essentially, that the economics of adopting these systems can also differ. So we're trying to encompass that as much as we can. We are rate limited by the funding that we bring in for these projects. And so we still realize we have a way to go, but now we're getting started on it. So we've developed now partial budgets for those, and we're now developing fact sheets. This is in a partnership with USDA, NRCS, and the National Association of Conservation Districts. NACD, they are interviewing about 25 of these farmers for videos that will accompany some of these fact sheets also. So those types of fact sheets, they're one of the things that we use in our farmer training program. Our training program that we employ, we don't really just parachute in and give a training program and then leave, but instead we set up these farmer-to-farmer mentor networks where we find a farmer that is already successfully implementing these soil health systems, and we pay them a modest stipend to serve as a mentor to other local farmers. They take part in our training sessions, and then we do the same thing with some of the local technical specialists. In one particular state, it's a conservation district employee that's that technical specialist. And in another state, it's an extension specialist or a couple of extension specialists that are performing that role. And so the idea is that when we go back, to the office after a couple of days of training sessions, then these people are still there to be on the phone to local, to answer the local questions and participate with the farmers in adopting these practices. This was supported by Wrangler, the VF Corporation, and the Walmart Foundation, and with the Healthy emphasis on cotton and interest in cotton. So we called it Healthy Soils for Sustainable Cotton, but the program could really be put anywhere. You can put in, Northwest and the Northern Plains with barley or anything like that. There's nothing that's kind of religious about having to be cotton. It's the training would go anywhere. So we've just started in these states because that's where we have the funding for it. So we started off in North Carolina, Georgia, and Arkansas last year. We had planned to expand to Mississippi, Texas, and California this year. Of course, COVID-19 got in the way. So what we've done now is we've developed some, I think there's like 7 webinars and then another 6 farmer-to-farmer videos. And we've got another dozen webinars that are on their way. It's virtual field days and stuff like that to try to kind of keep the momentum going. In the research and development, remember that box in the strategic plan there or chart that I showed you, kind of the upper right corner was research and development. There's a lot of different things that still need research when it comes to soil health, but this is one result that I wanted to show you. It's this chart looking at available water holding capacity at different clay contents going along the x-axis, and then the influence of organic carbon, which is kind of the best way of measuring the organic matter, what imparts the dark color to soils. And this relationship has always been known. I'm sure you've been hearing about it, that when you increase carbon in your soil, you can increase the available water holding capacity. But the problem is that relationship was kind of weak. And what we learned was it was from using the NRCS database, which is a very, very excellent database, but it was just designed for something different. It was not designed to look at the effects of management. It was designed to looking at different topographic positions where you move from the summit to the back slope down to the foot slope, increasing the organic matter as you go down the hill slope, and looking at those relationships. But what our big study, the database I was showing you, that 124 long-term research sites, allowed us to look at the effects of management on organic carbon and water holding capacity at different clay contents. So we've now really, really developed a much more refined, stronger equations for predicting the changes we can have in water holding capacity by improving carbon, improving soil health. So now we've started working with USDA and their carbon management evaluation tool. They call it Comet Farm, where farmers or advisors can go in and select different management practices. And now what we're adding, they can not only see the increases they can have in carbon by selecting different soil health practices, but now they can see what increases they can have in water holding capacity and therefore build more drought resilience. When it comes to policies, I promise you I'd eventually get to policies. One of the things that we have that you could find on our website is a catalog of more than 280 state level soil health policies and programs. It's very, very difficult, almost impossible to keep up to date because there's so many changes happening almost on a daily basis. But I still think there's good information there for you. You can click on a link and go to the program, and in many cases go to the individual and find out, what they have going on in their state in case you wanted to, kind of learn about it and potentially, emulating it in Montana too, see what you can learn from others. But then another things we've done is we've looked at the Farm Bill and evaluated some 60 provisions on their effects on the soil health. This is also available on the website too. We've essentially kind of given them a numeric rating for the different programs that USDA has for their impacts on soil health. And then just kind of more lastly, I guess the consumer education program that I mentioned as part of that overall strategy. Again, we've cataloged what a lot of other individuals and organizations have done. We've not done most of these. We're just trying to kind of compile them and put them in one place so they're useful for people to access, and that's available to you. And one of the things that we have done that I would encourage you to take a look at if you have not is our soil health documentary. It is an hour long, so it takes an investment, a commitment of time. But back before the virus hit, there were a lot of organizations, conservation districts, Rodale Research Institute, entire conferences, graduate programs that were showing it for a class and things like that, that were, inviting people in, serving popcorn or their favorite beverage or both, and sitting down and watching it and then having a good discussion about it afterwards. It's a very farmer friendly, environment friendly, and so hopefully maybe when we're all done with taking care of the virus, this is something you all might find useful also. One last thing I'd just kind of like to point out here, I'm running a little short on time, is that we have also just recently been tapped to serve as kind of the technical partner for the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is an alliance of some 25 states to help mostly through the state departments of agriculture. And our component is going to be really with helping them scale up adoption of soil health. So with that, I believe my time is up, and I will thank you very much again for the opportunity, and stop my screen sharing so your next speaker, Dwayne, can join in.
Thank you, Wayne. The work you've outlined is just sounds really exciting. So thank you very much. We're now going to hear from Dwayne Horkavoda, who will detail federal policies implicating soil health. Dwayne is the Agricultural Program Director at the Isaac Walton League of America. He was the former Executive Director of the Nebraska Wildlife Federation and a Farm Bill Outreach Coordinator at the National Wildlife Federation. Dwayne has extensive experience with conservation programs that are part of the federal Farm Bill and has educated groups across the country on soil health. Dwayne?
Well, hi, everybody, and thanks for having me. I'm going to pull up my presentation here. I'm really excited to be here and excited to see the rest of the agenda here. All right. Get it going here. Okay, so hopefully you can see the moose there. So the Isaac Walton League, for those of you who slept through your 17th century literature class, was the author of The Complete Angler. It was one of the first and still one of the best books on the art and science of fishing. It was first published in 1653, but you can still buy it today. So in 1922, when 54 anglers met in Chicago to create an organization that they wanted to help defend and protect America against the ravages that were happening at the time to our waters, to our wetlands, they named it the Isaac Walton League of America after the guy who'd become the patron saint of fishermen. Those green dots you can see across the map are over 200 chapters that we have around the country. We currently don't have any in Montana, but if you've got 10 friends and want to start a chapter, talk to me. We'd be glad to set you up. We have about 40,000 members nationwide. Our agricultural policy program at the League has been working really since the first Farm Bill back in the 1930s to try to make sure that we inject conservation into those farm bills and into federal policy to help farmers and ranchers be better stewards of their soil, air, woods, waters, and wildlife. And we've really gone all in on soil health. We see so many benefits for waters, for wetlands, for our streams, and for our farmers, and for our soil conservation, and for carbon storage. There's so many multiple benefits from soil health that we think it's really the future in terms of agricultural policy. And so that's where a lot of our focus is. So why should farmers and ranchers care about ag policy? And I would say the answer to that is follow the money. If you look at Department of Agriculture conservation programs in Montana last year, over $130 million came into the state for those major US Department of Agriculture conservation programs. And those had an impact on the landscape. The Working Lands programs, which helped farmers and ranchers put in place things like rotational grazing systems, plant cover crops, put in place nutrient management practices, All of those touched about 1 million acres of land in Montana last year. Another 1 million acres of Montana is in the Conservation Reserve Program, which is a federal program that pays farmers to take highly erodible soil out of crop production and plant it in grasses, shrubs or trees in order to protect the soil, provide wildlife and water quality benefits. So it's certainly not all of Montana, but it's a big chunk of Montana that we're touching with these farm bill programs every year. So why would policymakers care about farmers and ranchers? Well, for one, some of them run for election, and I hear you've got a pretty interesting race right now for a US Senate seat. So they care about you because they need your vote. The other reason that they care about you is because agriculture is a big industry in the state, and they need to know more about it as they're developing policy, because most of the members of Congress are not farmers, most of them are not ranchers. So what do they need to understand from you? Two things really. One is the costs, the benefits, and the challenges of soil health systems. They need to hear from real life farmers and ranchers what soil health is, what it means on your farm or ranch, what are the benefits, what are the investments and the other costs to putting these systems in place, what are the challenges that you face? And they need that so they can develop better policies. And second, they need to understand how to craft programs that meet your needs. So these programs put a lot of money into the state, about $6 billion around the country from those conservation programs. We need to be meeting your needs as a farmer and rancher, and that's what the policymakers need to understand, is how they can best meet your needs. So what can farmers or ranchers do? Well, there's a lot of different ways that you can engage and educate legislators, agency staff, and others about soil health. If you're holding farm tours, that's a great place to invite policymakers to come see the farm, come understand the systems that you're using. If you want to just hold a farm tour, invite your member of Congress to come out and see it, your state legislator to come out and see your farm. If they can't come to you, come to them. So that could be through visits to their office, sending letters. Maybe you could do a virtual tour of your farm. Any way you can find to educate policymakers about soil health, about the things that you're doing on your farm or ranch. The more knowledge we can give to them, the better. And tell your story. Tell about what you see going on your farm or ranch and the challenges that you face. So it's a pretty exciting time in soil health. Things are happening right now. USDA and others are testing soil health protocols. You just heard about that from Wayne. That's really exciting. We're just about at the point where scientists know enough about soil health to be able to find the right ways to test the soil so you can understand what's going on in your soil. USDA is getting to the point where they'll have USDA soil health planning protocols in place so that you can walk into your NRCS office and ask for a soil health plan. We're trying to get there. The Natural Resource Conservation Service this year asked every one of their state offices to develop a soil health strategy for the NRCS office in their state. So Montana and every other state now has one. Not all of them are quite public yet. They've been working on them over the summer, but that's going to help the NRCS state offices focus on soil health and focus more of what they're doing on things that hopefully will help you as a farmer and rancher. And as we're going to hear in the next section, there's a whole lot of state and local soil health initiatives. As those state and local policymakers understand soil health, they begin to understand the benefits that go along with it for their state. And they're trying to come up with their own ways and their own initiatives to try to promote soil health. So what are some things that you can do as an individual or organization? So if you're an organization, there's a couple things you can do that really don't cost you any money. They may cost you some staff time and some volunteer time. But here's three things you can do. One is to help ask the NRCS to prioritize soil health in delivering those conservation programs, the Conservation Stewardship Program, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And the more we can help the USDA state offices understand how important those practices are and urge them to provide special initiatives for soil health, to add incentives, to add scoring, to better prioritize applications for funding for soil health practices. That will help us spend more of that money that comes into the state on soil health. The second thing you can do is to promote a couple of programs that are already in place that farmers can sign up for. One is the Soil Health and Income Protection Program. It's a short-term thing that came out of the 2018 Farm Bill. The deadline is November 20th for farmers to enroll. These are 3 to 5 year contracts for farmers to take a portion of their cropland out of production to plant grasses in order to rebuild the health of the soil. It's limited to 5 states in the Northern Plains. So it includes the Montana, the Dakotas, Minnesota, and Iowa. And it's a one-time deal, but you can promote that to your farmers. You can also suggest that farmers and other landowners look at the Continuous Conservation Reserve Program. That's the part of the CRP that includes automatic enrollment for practices like planting windbreaks, planting buffer strips along streams, and filter strips. So those are things that you can do as an organization or even as a neighbor to help encourage people to promote soil health. If you have some money as an organization or agency that you can leverage, there are some ways you can do that. The Environmental Quality Incentives Program provides a conservation innovation grant, which is a grant to help develop and test innovative conservation approaches. Those could be used for soil health approaches. A part of that program is also specifically for on-farm trials to compare different conservation practices to see how they work in different soils, different climates, different farming systems. And a portion of that is set aside, about 10 million of it nationwide, for specifically soil health demonstration trials. So that's something that you could try to get involved in. And finally, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program relies on partner-driven proposals. And what those are for is where partners come in with a match in a particular watershed or area. The USDA will agree to direct conservation dollars to address natural resource problems in those targeted areas. So it's a good way to get more USDA money into a particular area. I'm going to refer you to a couple publications you can find on our website, iwla.org. It's under the Soils tab. One is Healthy Soil, Healthy Water, and that's a publication we just published, which documents those opportunities I just went through and some others, ways to leverage the 2018 Farm Bill to promote soil health. And the second is the State and Local Soil Health Strategies, which outlines about 36 different soil health local and state initiatives from around the country. And you're going to be hearing more of that with the next panel. So what about the future? What can we do in the future? Well, as we're looking at, there's a couple ideas that we've come up with and in promoting. One is a state and tribal soil health grant program. And what this would be federal grants to states and tribes to develop and then to implement state soil health plans, so that you have a plan in your state that's driven by your state agencies and organizations, and that focuses on your farming systems, on your soils, on your climates. And it's the second idea that we have is crop insurance discount for soil health practices. Farmers who practice good soil health are also more resilient, so they're less likely to have a major crop loss, which would trigger a crop insurance payout. So if you're a good farmer, you ought to get a good farmer discount. So we're promoting in this at the federal level. I would note that both Iowa and Illinois provide state versions of this. So they will provide a $5 per acre discount for farmers who plant cover crops as a way of promoting soil health. So there's a couple more ideas for the future. So that's the presentation. I think if you look at the things that Wayne talked about in terms of soil health, there's a whole lot of growing knowledge about soil health. There's a whole lot of interest now with policymakers in the benefits of soil health for our soil, for our waters, for climate change, and for our farm income and for our rural communities. And those are all really critical benefits. What we need to do and what we need your help with as farmers, as organizations, is to help us do a better job at educating policymakers about the opportunities, about the benefits and the challenges of soil health, so that they in turn can write policies that will help us promote this nationwide. So feel free to get in touch with me. That's my email address right there. Again, you can find us on our website, iwla.org. And this is our agriculture program team. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dwayne. Now we'll be having a brief question and answer session to our two speakers on soil health and federal policy. Here to moderate our questions and answer sessions today is John Sugan, Northern Plains member based in Billings. John?
Thanks, Steve. Got a few good questions. Thanks, Dwayne and Wayne, for your time. First question is from Jeff S. It's quite a last name. I'm sorry, I'll butcher that. So he already asked Wayne a question about the NRCS's conservation assessment and ranking tool. And essentially he asks, will it be possible to assess soil health? Looks like Wayne answered electronically and said it was not good enough for his purposes. Dwayne, do you have a response to, are you familiar with the tool? What do you think about it?
I am familiar with the tool, not greatly familiar, but I think it is a tool that USDA has put together to try to assess applications that come in for different conservation programs. I think we're not there yet in terms of using it to really assess soil health impacts. So I think it's new this year. I think there's still some work to do with that tool.
Thank you. Looks like another question from Jeff. Dwayne, do you think the recent requirement that state NRCS offices have soil health plans will make a difference in utilizing federal conservation resources to promote soil health?
I do, and I hope so. I think the response is different in every state because you have different people in charge of every state NRCS office. I think it's great that at the national level, the agency has said we need to put more focus on soil health. So I think that's a very positive thing. And at least with some of the state plans we've seen, I think we've seen some positive things there in terms of USDA trying to figure out how they can do a better job at educating their own employees, at educating partners, and at helping farmers with soil health practices and systems.
Thank you, Dwayne. Looks like oh, sorry, I got lost in the queue here. This is for Wayne from an anonymous attendee.
Must be a hard question.
It could be. Yeah. Buckle your seatbelt, I suppose. Here's the question. Isn't the time to put what we already know about the massive ecosystem restoration at the front of the line in both focus and money, and put research behind that focus to fine tune the next push?
Yeah, you know, I think the nature of the question is basically asking, don't we know enough to move forward? I believe that's my interpretation, and I would say yes. I think we do know enough, and I think that's one of the great opportunities that we have in soil health, is that there has been decades of research now on things like no tillage and cover crops, but what we are still faced with is the fact that only about 4% of cropland in the U.S. uses cover crops, and only about 26% or so uses no tillage. And when it comes to, grazing management on rangeland, only about 1% uses prescribed grazing. And so we know that there are these wonderful benefits to it, but we have very low adoption rates. And so that's one of the reasons why we are focusing so much on adoption to help kind of scale up those benefits.
Thank you, Wayne. Yeah, you can only lead a horse to water. You can't force it to drink. Thank you for all your efforts in that venue. Another question from Jeff S. For Dwayne, do you think the definition of soil health provided by NRCS is ideal? How might you improve it? I suppose that's the question.
Yeah, well, anytime you get into a definition, I think you'll have a lot of different responses depending on who you're looking at. And so I don't know that the NRCS USDA definition is the right one, but I think in terms of what I'm thinking about, I think of soil health as life in the soil. So, and that's a hard thing to define because it's, there's so many different pieces of it. So I suspect Wayne probably has a better idea about just how to define soil health from a scientific view. Whenever we try to define things in terms of a policy view, it all gets difficult.
So I'm happy to jump in if you'd like, if you're kind of queuing me up. And so I guess, yeah, so NRCS defines it as the continued capacity of a soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And it admittedly sounds a bit academic, but I think that when you tease out the different components of it, in my mind, it makes a lot of sense. Well, words like a vital living ecosystem, I mean, that kind of breathes that life into it. And looking at the capacity of the soil to function is that vital living ecosystem. That word function there, that's really, in my mind, kind of at the heart of soil health is how you can help your soils function better. Those functions like providing water, providing nutrients, suppressing plant pathogens. And so probably no definition is ever going to be complete, but I will say that I'm old enough to have observed and survived about 20, 30 years of debate on how do you define sustainable agriculture. And I don't think it really helped to move us any further along down that road, arguing over one word or another. And, I think that so many things, as I mentioned a while ago, we know what to do. Now let's help provide the support farmers and ranchers need in order to make that decision to adopt these systems, to bring these environmental benefits for the rest of us and the productivity benefits for them and for supporting their rural communities.
Okay, thank you both. I'm afraid we only have time for one more question. And this one is from Sam Wagner. Kind of a tough one, but if you keep it brief, that would be ideal. What is the best way to get started when you have little to no organization on soil health in your state? And this isn't directed at anyone in particular. Sorry to have that be the last one. And thank you.
Do you want to go, Dwayne?
Sure, I'll jump in. So I think one way is to go, if you have very few resources, is to go talk to your Natural Resource Conservation Service. That's a great place to get started and find out what's going on from them and try to reinforce with them how important soil health is to you. And they can also put you in touch with, there's probably a network in your state, and if there's not, it's probably coming soon. Whether it's a Soil Health Alliance or coalition, they're popping up in about every state. And so I think I would go find your sustainable agriculture and your organic farming groups in the state, talk to the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and probably talk to your soil and water conservation districts.
Yeah. In 10 seconds, I'll try to be very, very brief. I would echo everything Dwayne just said. NRCS has a national mandate for focusing on soil health. So if you go to an NRCS office, you will have open ears and somebody that should be able to help you. And I would say that if there's nothing really going on in your state or your district or region of the state, you could be the one to get it going. Because it takes passion. If you got the passion and the drive for it, then man, go for it.
Thanks, Wayne, for the encouragement and the excitement. I really appreciate that. And thanks to all who submitted questions. I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to everyone. We'll do our best to get these answered via type in an ideal world. And on that note, I'm going to turn it back to Steve. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, and thank you, John. We're now going to be moving into the state policy session of our agenda. Did you know in Montana, we don't have anyone at state level in charge of soil health? No one's tracking it, coordinating research, being a resource. Meanwhile, there are multiple people specifically in charge of weed eradication. State soil health policy is a rapidly changing landscape. 7 states currently have soil health laws on the books, and another 9 have bills introduced in their legislatures. Across the country, the majority of US states have initiated some sort of activity on soil health policy. Our next 3 speakers have worked to advance soil health policy in their respective states, and 2 of them come from states that just passed some major legislation in the past year. Before I introduce the next speaker, I want to remind everyone to please feel free to drop any questions you may have into the question and answer feature at any time. We'll do our best to answer your questions at the end of the session. Now, first on our agenda is Brian Show. Brian is the Associate Policy Director of the California Climate and Agriculture Network, or CalCAN. Brian began his career in 2009 on his grandparents' farm in North Dakota, and has been involved with sustainable agriculture and community food security ever since. Prior to CalCAN, he served as the program coordinator and government resource advisor at the Farmer Veteran Coalition, where he advised beginning farmers and advocated for their policy priorities. Today, Brian is going to share the story of California's Healthy Soil Program and talk about some of the lessons learned. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Steve. First, want to check and make sure you can hear me all right. And I'm trying to start my video and it says the host has stopped it. I don't know if that's something in the back end can address. In the meantime, I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. There we go. Thank you. All right. So here we are. Well, good morning all from California. It's exciting to be part of this summit. It feels a little bit like coming home for me. As Steve mentioned, I grew up in the Dakotas, north and south, and I have family in Montana, across the state in Lewistown, Livingston, and Kalispell. And I think I saw a couple folks joining from Lewistown and Livingston on this summit. So nice to be with you all. Wish I could be with you in person in Big Sky Country. So as Steve mentioned, I'm the Associate Policy Director with the California Climate and Agriculture Network, and I'm going to share a little bit with you today about our experience with the Healthy Soils program here in the state. So a quick overview of my presentation. Just going to introduce CalCAN and our work and our impact a little bit. Share a little bit more about the Healthy Soils program history, how it works, and some early results we've seen, and then share some lessons we've learned that may be relevant for other states, including Montana. I can't talk about this work without first acknowledging my ancestors and why I'm here. My family has been farming as far back as we've been able to trace it, back to present or modern day Switzerland. But for the last 100 years or so, they've been farming in northwestern North Dakota, raising small grains and cattle. That was the first farm I worked on, and this is a picture of the most recent 3 generations of the Shobe family to be farming. So those are my roots, and I approach all of this work with the question of not just how we ensure the viability of agriculture for the next generation, but also for the next 300 years of descendants. And obviously, conserving our soils and ensuring a stable climate are a critical part of that. So today I have the joy of working with this coalition of folks. The organizations you see on the left are our primary coalition members. We're a coalition of farmers, ranchers, ag professionals, and scientists, and we're united under the mission of advancing state and federal policies to make it easier for farmers and ranchers to adopt practices and systems that provide multiple benefits. So for their farm economics, for environmental outcomes, and of course for our climate. So we work on a range of issues from water and irrigation and energy efficiency to farmland conservation to on-farm renewable energy, and of course, soil health. And it's been really exciting. I've been with CalCan for just over 4 years now to see the impact that advocacy has had. So far in California, the state has invested over $325 million in on-farm climate solutions. 50 million of that has gone towards the Healthy Soils program since 2017. And what that's meant on the ground is that farmers like Jose Robles, pictured here on the right with his granddaughter, have received technical assistance from the National Center for Appropriate Technology based in Montana, and financial assistance to plant cover crops, a hedgerow, and apply compost for the first time in his almond orchard. And in his words, he's already seen benefits in terms of making his soils spongier, retaining and holding more water, and also with some pest management issues that he's been dealing with. It also has meant young ranchers like Molly Taylor, pictured here, have gotten funding to experiment with applying compost on her pastures and converting to no-till. Molly's a great story because she leveraged her Healthy Soils grant and turned it into an on-farm research trial working with her local cooperative extension and resource conservation district, and a group of other ranchers in her county to study the impacts of compost application on forage quantity and quality, as well as invasive species. So just gives you a sense of the way in which a small amount of funding can sort of generate larger investment and change. Of course, none of this happened overnight. And one of the things I really want to impress on folks is that policy often is a long game. There are exceptions, and I think we're going to be hearing about New Mexico, which has moved really fast. But in California, it's been a long journey, and our journey started well over a decade ago. In 2006, the state legislature passed, and then Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger signed the California Global Warming Solutions Act, which set a mandatory greenhouse gas emissions reduction target for the state, and also established a cap and trade system to reduce climate emissions over time. In the years following, it became clear that most were only seeing agriculture as part of the problem. And there were very few voices, if any, who were lifting up the solutions that our farmers and ranchers have to offer. So CalCan formed in 2009 to fill that void and to help lift up and advocate for investments on our farms and ranches to provide some of the solutions that the state would need. So between 2010 and 2016, we ran 3 different pieces of legislation to try and set up climate smart agriculture incentive programs. And I just want to be honest, because it's part of our story. All 3 of those bills failed. And that was tough. It felt like a long slog. But the benefit of running those bills is it provided us opportunities over 6 years to educate policymakers and their staff, to have lots of conversations with state agencies, and do things like farm tours, legislative briefings, write reports, and all of that work, organizing folks and educating folks, led to, in 2015, Governor Jerry Brown establishing the Healthy Soils Initiative by executive order, which formally set up an interagency working group along with stakeholders to flesh out ideas for how the state could better promote healthy soils practices through research, technical assistance, incentives, and also more effective or streamlined regulations. That initiative is still in effect, intact. It's shifted more of its focus to look at the regulatory side of things, like how we can promote compost production in the state and make it easier for farms to produce compost on their own sites. But it created buy-in in that first year for an incentives program, and that helped us in 2016 to finally get over the hurdle and establish the Healthy Soils program in law. And since then, we have been engaged in ongoing implementation of the program to improve it, and ongoing budget advocacy, because we still have to fight for funding every year. And that looks like a lot of meetings with legislators, like the one you see pictured on the right, between some of our farmers and their representative. So I'm going to give you a quick breakdown of how the program works. So the California Department of Food and Agriculture administers the program, but it's overseen by a 9-member science advisory panel, which we wrote into the legislation must include producers. And that panel has served as the public forum for sharing and discussing feedback on the program and how the program should evolve over time, which has been a helpful forum. And so a lot of our work these days looks like my boss in the picture below giving testimony to those panel members. The California Healthy Soils program has 2 project categories. The first is incentives projects, which give grants of up to $100,000 to farmers and ranchers to implement 1 or more healthy soils practices for 3 years, with the idea being that 3 years is hopefully long enough for them to get a little bit past the learning curve of these practices and start to see the agronomic benefits so that they can continue the practices on their own after that 3-year period. We've definitely seen farmers also using that 3-year period and their grants to buy the equipment they'll need to sustain the practice in the long run. Demonstration projects are the second category, and those are for farmers in collaboration with nonprofits, universities, or tribes to set up on-farm demos and field days to promote farmer-to-farmer learning. And within that category, type A projects include soil health and greenhouse gas research, and type B are just focused on outreach and education. And in figure 1 on the right, you can see that early on, the majority of the funding actually went to demonstration projects because there actually wasn't a lot of demand in the first year for incentives. And that was due to some issues, challenges with the program and its application, but also just there wasn't a lot of word out about the program yet. You'll see that more funding has gone to incentives with each subsequent round as farmer interest, awareness, and demand for the program has grown, and as demonstration projects have really done their part to increase awareness and interest in the practices. This slide here shows the eligible practices in the program. We're up to over 25. Almost all of these are based on NRCS conservation practice standards. And the Healthy Soils program effectively uses EQIP cost scenarios, but pays the whole 100% of the cost scenario. So it effectively doubles EQIP payment rates in most cases. Funding for the program so far has come primarily from the state's cap and trade revenues. I do want to note, as grateful as we are to have that as a funding source, it has been highly competitive and variable every year. And so in the last 5 years, we've actually already had 2 gap years in funding for the program, which has been a definite challenge in terms of building momentum and capacity. So we are ourselves looking for ways to diversify the funding streams for this program. And then the last thing I want to mention about this is technical assistance was not initially included in the Healthy Soils program. We had to pass separate legislation to make that be part of it. But now 5% of Healthy Soils program funds are automatically set aside to pay for folks like resource conservation districts and cooperative extension to do the outreach, project planning, application assistance, implementation and reporting assistance that most farmers appreciate when they're dealing with a government program. And since that took effect, we've seen that 2/3 of applications and farmers are taking advantage of that service. So it's definitely a critical element. So cumulatively to date, across those first 3 rounds, the program has funded almost 600 incentives projects, 67 demonstration projects. It's resulted in implementation of healthy soils practices on over 50,000 acres with some substantive GHG emissions. And importantly, on the demonstration project side, close to 2,000 farmers have now attended those projects, which goes to show demonstration projects are a great way of extending the impact of a program with limited dollars. And then in figure 3 on the right, you can just see the sort of increase that we've seen in farmer demand for the program over a 6-fold increase over these first 3.5 years, which has been exciting. Folks often want to know how the program is being received by farms of different scales and sizes. I'll say we're actually finishing a progress report on the first 3 rounds of the program that has data broken down by all kinds of other information, cropping systems, demographics, et cetera, land tenure, organic status. So if folks are interested in that, we'll be coming out with that soon. For now, I just wanted to show this chart showing the distribution of funding across farm sizes and point out that the vast majority of the funding so far has gone to small and mid-scale farms, which we think is important because we know those farms are those least likely to have the resources to experiment with and adopt these practices on their own. And then finally, this is the breakdown of the practices that projects have implemented so far. You'll see that compost is by far the most popular. Cover crops are the second most popular. And then after that, you get down into hedgerows, mulching, reduced till, et cetera. Projects can and do implement more than one practice. So we've seen that approximately half of projects have implemented 2 or more practices. So I want to pivot now to just some thoughts for other states based on our experience here and also conversations I've had with lots of advocates around the country. I had a conversation with Ty from Northern Plains, before doing this presentation. So tried to tailor some of these to what I understand Montana's situation to currently be and where y'all are at. The first, so these are sort of divided into 4 buckets. The first bucket is for any program that's created, just some general principles. Include farmers and ranchers and ag groups from the start. It'll help to improve buy-in and make sure that any program is designed to actually meet farmers and ranchers' needs. Find a steady funding source if at all possible. It's really important to build momentum and capacity on the ground to support these practices. Tie program outcomes to long-term state goals. In California, we've done that through climate goals, but in other states like Ohio, they're doing that through water quality goals. The benefit of that is that it helps to secure long-term support for the programs. Make the application farmer friendly. Farmers are your best advocates in terms of spreading the word about these programs, and having that be easy is important to that word of mouth. Minimize land tenure and financial barriers. I don't know what the stats are in Montana, but in California, half of agricultural land is leased. So these programs have to be able to accommodate folks who are operating on one-year leases. And as we know, farmers and ranchers almost every year face cash flow issues. So making programs work with advance payments as opposed to just being by reimbursement can be really helpful. And then finally, for the benefit of each program and all of us, it's really important to have serious program evaluation to understand if these programs are successful in encouraging long-term adoption of these practices beyond the grant period. The second bucket is other funding options. I know finding government revenue in most states is a touchy subject, and it's especially hard right now during COVID when state budgets have taken such a hit. So I just wanted to share some other ideas that we're looking at, or other things that exist in California or other states to spark some thinking on that. So options include a synthetic fertilizer mill fee. In California, that's set at 0.2 cents per dollar of fertilizer sold. But if you want a more conservative state example, Iowa has theirs set at 70 cents per ton of fertilizer. In California, we also have a pesticide mill fee. Again, a tiny fraction of the actual dollar value sold, but they generate important funds to support these types of programs. We're also looking at a plastics fee in California that will be voted on in 2022 that will generate funding for compost application on farms. We've worked with some really awesome chefs in California, like Anthony Mint, who's pictured here, who started a voluntary program for restaurants to add a 1% surcharge to their customers' bills that funds on-farm conservation practices. And then, we've seen in other states, folks look at development fees for conversion of ag and open space lands. And in California, we received one-time funding from a state bond. All right, I understand I have 1 minute left, so I'm gonna breeze through the last two slides. If it's not possible in the short term to get sufficient funding for a fully fledged incentives program, other options that still have a lot of impact that are lower cost include demonstration projects, technical assistance, farmer-driven research projects, working with agencies to streamline regulations that are barriers to adopting these practices, and even just working groups to form partnerships and continue the conversations about policies with different stakeholders and government agencies. And then lastly, all of this requires political organizing and advocacy. It's just part of what we have to do. And so I just wanted to remind folks that because healthy soils have so many benefits, there are a lot of really great natural allies to reach out to and build alliances with. In California, we've had a lot of success with working with public health, food security, water and wildlife advocates, including in big metropolitan urban areas like LA, which is where this photo is from. Second, you have to think long-term. And so if you can't get your ideal policy through in year one, finding ways to continue the conversation and build momentum is important. We've done that through working groups, through getting goals or public processes, or working on reports. And then finally, just remembering at the end of the day that farmers and ranchers continue to be the most effective advocates. I don't just say that anecdotally. We've actually done polling research in California, and even in blue state, heavily urban California, farmers and ranchers are seen as very trusted voices on these issues. And so, the more we can get politicians out to their fields and farmers into politicians' offices, the more success we'll all have. So that's what I got. Look forward to your questions and learning more the rest of the day.
Thank you, Brian. Joining us next is Isabel Yenidis, who will be speaking to New Mexico's brand new soil health program that was just established in 2019. Isabel is the co-founder of the New Mexico Healthy Soil Working Group and a skilled community organizer. Draws from her experience in policymaking and farmer-to-farmer education. Isabel was also involved with the California Healthy Soil Program as part of the California Climate and Agricultural Network. At the Ecological Farming Association, or EcoFarm, she established the organization's Regenerative Agriculture Initiative and helped coordinate the annual EcoFarm Conference, bringing together around 1,800 food system stakeholders from across the US and internationally. She represents the working group on the National Healthy Soils Policy Network and serves on the board of the New Mexico Food and Agricultural Policy Program. Please join me in welcoming Isabel.
Thank you so much. So my name is Isabel Yenidis. I'm joining you from Santa Fe in New Mexico, from the homelands of the Pueblo peoples, specifically the Tewa-speaking world and Okeowinge Pueblo. I want to thank the Northern Plains Resource Council for organizing this great forum, and especially Ty for all his help getting prepared and set up. So I will share my screen with you. Okay, clicking this away. All right, so this should work. So really interesting presentations that were already part of this great day. I want to open by stating that we in New Mexico, of course, are part of a larger movement around soil health, and specifically soil health policy. And we already heard from California, and then we had some federal overview, really interesting. So I just wanted to make you aware of these resources that are out there. There was a question, you know, how to get started. And one place might be this US state soil health policy map, which I'm actually working with right now in currently helping to maintain this website. A future goal is actually to have local volunteers. So if you're interested, please let us know. And you will see that Montana is activity has been noted around soil health policy. And I understand that there's actually, that might change pretty soon, and something might be drafted. So I'm really excited about that. But you see on this map, though, is that there's really very few states where there's no known activity at the moment. And that's just to say that, you know, the makers of this map don't know of activity. There might very well be something going on as well. So it's a real big movement sweeping the nation and indeed the world. And I think that's very exciting. There's a second page that's just been launched, the US Soil Policy Action page. Just check that out. That actually can connect you with your policymakers right away, and also on the local level. And then lastly, this Google group, which is led by Steve Coletti, where he keeps us abreast of all that's going on nationwide in terms of soil health policy. So these are some really good resources to get started. So zooming in on New Mexico, as was mentioned, we had kind of a whirlwind development around healthy soil policy. I personally have only been here for 2 years and a little bit of months. So in 2008 is when it all started, and a very small core group came together. Literally, there's just 5 of us. We call ourselves the New Mexico Healthy Soil Working Group. And we are a grassroots group. That is really important to understand. We are not connected to the government. We are just advocates, people on the ground. We came together, we wrote a bill, the Healthy Soil Act. And honestly, it was a lot of copy paste. You know, we just looked around what other states are doing. I had worked in California with CalCan, so I was familiar with the California Healthy Soil Program. So we took a little bit from that, we took from Maryland, we took from, you know, Hawaii, and then put our own language as well. I mention that because not many people know that you can just write your own bill. You don't have to be a lawyer. It will go through, you know, the Legislative Council to make sure it is proper language for the law, but you can actually get started on your own. We did a stakeholder survey, you know, among farmers and ranchers and other stakeholders, just to parse the landscape. And we found that there was a lot of support for soil health. I mean, a lot had been done. There were a lot of other nonprofits that were, of course, already active, and of course, NRCS. And so we felt the time was really ripe. So the bill got introduced in both houses, and then, you know, made its way through those chambers. We have a very short legislative session in New Mexico. It's kind of interesting. All legislators are volunteers, and it's only 2 months every second year. So, so in terms of being fast, yeah, we had to be. We also really, what Brian mentioned was very important, was the coalition building with all those stakeholders. And we really wanted this to be a bipartisan effort. So we visited every legislator, no matter from which party. We had, you know, over 100 agriculture and conservation groups in support, dozens of farms and ranches. And, you know, what is unusual, perhaps, is to have both the Farm Bureau and the Sierra Club, you know, in support. How did we do that? Well, it was really important for us to come to consensus around this law, not just to pass it, but to pass it, you know, with consensus. And so we did listen a lot to those who might have opinions about it that were not positive. And that is, you know, one thing that is, I believe, very important, especially in today's, you know, a world where we don't agree on a lot of things. Listen to each other is so important. And then change, being open to change, being open to amend your bill. I mean, ideally, you would do that perhaps before you go into the legislature, but you can also do it while you're in there. That's fine. We were actually able to pass the law unanimously, ultimately, in 2019, after it was with bipartisan support in the House, with few legislators still being skeptical or dissenting, but in the Senate, it was unanimously passed. And that was really on account of this broad coalition that was in support of the bill. So then in 2019, after governor signed it, the New Mexico Department of Agriculture is now in charge of the Healthy Soil Program, which is really at the heart of the bill. And they were really quick in getting it together, setting up a grant program, which rolled out in 2019. And then in 2020, we were able to secure recurring funding, because the first time it was just a one-time appropriation that was granted by different legislatures. And then also in 2020, we had a second round of applications, and the next slide has more information about that. Just briefly about the ingredients of the Healthy Soil Act. At the heart, again, is this program, the grant program. So the goal is to provide education and also financial support to land managers on the ground, farmers, ranchers, you know, foresters, smallholders, you know, those people who actually have the ability to achieve soil health. That's who we want to support. And you might wonder, why is this needed on a state level? We have NRCS, right, as was mentioned before, and that is absolutely true. But what we were looking for was to create a program that is really easy to access, that is geared towards our place here, and that also doesn't just provide cost share, but provides 100% coverage. So it's voluntary. That was also really important. And then we do have an equity clause in that, like Brian mentioned, small scale agriculture has really a greater hurdle. And then also we have 19 pueblos, 3 tribes in New Mexico. So we were really important. It was important that those were able to access the program, which with a lot of state funds, that's not necessarily the case. And then we also have historical, Hispano land-based people through the land grants. They are also especially addressed in the bill. Okay, then the bill is really centered on 5 universal principles of soil health versus practices. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. So that's really different from the California program, which is based on different practices that are more or less lined up with NRCS. So I think they are lined up with NRCS. Why did we choose principles? Well, that's actually an interesting story, because in the beginning, we did have practices, specific practices in the bill. And that proved to be too prickly for some constituents, some farmers, some rancher groups and advocates. And so we amended it out. So we just left the principles in there. And you're probably familiar with these. They're on the screen. There's usually, NRCS has 4. Sometimes you see 6, which includes context, which I just put the big circle around it, meaning, these principles really apply to wherever you are in the world, actually, where there is soil. And they reinforce each other. They're not prescriptive, as that is, because the application will always change depending on where you are. And that is really, really important, because it actually empowers those that are influencing soil health to figure out what's best for them, for their place. And the reinforcing power of each other really emphasizes the ecosystem, whole farm, whole ranch approach that ultimately we want to see happening, because that gives the best amount of benefits. And those were mentioned before. In New Mexico, we're especially concerned with water. And we're also really focusing in on the economic viability of long-term agriculture, feeding people in a long-term, becoming self-sufficient, being resilient to extreme weather events and those things. So in that sense, the principles are really helpful, because they empower people to think for themselves and to figure out what works for them. And on a very practical level, we don't have to go into the bill if we want to react to, for example, changing science or a new practice that comes out. As long as these principles are upheld, the bill will remain useful. Because as soon as you have to change your bill language, it opens it up. It gets to be vulnerable, because people will vote on it again, and people might, argue against the bill again. So on a very practical level, it's a good idea to focus on principles versus practices, is what we found. And what I find really great about this story is that it came about, honestly, because we listened to our opponents. And so this is a good story to demonstrate that your opponents are really your best friends. They have important things to say, and it will need all of us coming together in order to really achieve greater soil health on a large scale in our states. So here are just some figures, and I can go through this rather quickly. Those were the first 2 years of the New Mexico Healthy Soil Program. And you can see very quickly that it was widely embraced. It got off to a running start with over 100 grant applications from farmers, from ranchers. Only 19 could be awarded, and then the same with the educational projects. So, 2 million in grant requests versus 375,000 available. Yeah, I mean, it shows the great interest, but it also shows the great need. So that is definitely something that we're grappling with. I'm also showing on the slides the original bill sponsors, who were all Democrats, all 3 of them. But then now in its second year, where we just have a budget year, you can see that the interest and, well, I suppose legislators felt like they could really step up and be in support of this program. It was really raising, we had many more legislators who were able to support it, and from both sides of the aisle. And lots of farmers and ranchers. You can see the ranchers with the big hats. So this year was, of course, a different year than any one of us thought it would be. And it was a difficult year for anyone in policy, because a lot of the legislative sessions were shortened because of the COVID. But we managed nonetheless to keep the course and work on implementation, which is often the less glamorous work, upholding the intent of the law, ensuring equity in how it's executed, and hopefully securing increased funding. So the program is now included in the agency's budget, in the Department of Agriculture's budget. So that is really, really good. But nothing is for certain. And so what you see on the screen here is what our small group is doing in addition to soil health policy, which really we just see as an organizing tool, first and foremost, raising visibility of the issue and giving it, I guess, a veneer of to legitimize your questions as well. As if something is a bill and passed by the legislature and supported with money, public money, that is really a good seal of approval, right? So in addition, we're working on creating a statewide soil health champions network, and championing is really a verb. It's about peer-to-peer education, which has been mentioned before as being really successful, and that's at the heart of what we do. Composting is another thing that we're tackling. We have a compost coalition going, and we're really interested in teasing out the economic details of soil health for our state, very specifically into that. In that regard, we just commissioned a food and farm economy study, and we will follow up with case studies so that we can, I think Wayne mentioned it as well, the economical case for soil health is very good to make. So what's next? That's a really fun part of my presentation, I think, because we were really looking at, and I think we're in the same boat with so many others this year. It's like, okay, so there's no money in the legislature. Actually, New Mexico went from a 2 billion surplus to a 2 billion minus. Their budget cuts across the board. So, asking for increased funding is a bit of a fool's game. But on the other hand, we really want to find other funding mechanisms for the New Mexico Healthy Soil Program. And Brian had some really good ideas earlier that I definitely will take note of. But what we are looking to do is it is just a very simple thing. When folks are getting a refund for their income tax from the state, they can donate a part or all of it to the New Mexico Healthy Soil Program. So that's a very simple mechanism, but it sets up a healthy soil fund in the legislature. Sorry for that. And once you have such a fund in place, then you can fill it with private or nonprofit monies. For example, this restaurant initiative that Brian mentioned is really interesting. And so on a more visionary level, we are also looking to pass a memorial that would aspire to 100% regenerative agriculture in New Mexico by 2030. And so that's really a strong aspirational goal. And that is what I believe policy can also really do, which is like signaling where we should go. So not just kind of incremental, small, steps, but actually be visionary, put this out there. And I believe that is the moment we're in right now. Because of the coronavirus, there has been raising consciousness about food and health and local food. And because we've seen the long food chains collapse, people are really become aware of the need to grow food locally. And because we've seen all the health challenges coming out of COVID and pre-existing conditions and all of them tied to health and nutrition, that is another really important aspect to bring to the fore right now in what we do in policy. And you can build on that as you are coming up with your own policy ideas. So we really want to do this memorial, and it might be comparable to, you can think of a renewable portfolio standard, but it's for sustainable food production. And so, it would be staggered in how it would be achieved, 25% regenerative agriculture by 2022, 50 by 2026, and so forth, to get to 100% by 2030. And so it's an aspirational, voluntary bill, and it's based on the widespread adoption of soil health principles, but it goes beyond that. There's a really important discussion going on right now, like what is regenerative agriculture? It is more than just soil health. It has social aspects. We need to acknowledge the cultural heritage of the work that we do. Indigenous peoples have been working with nature, for forever, and a lot of the practices and principles that we promote today has come out of that, and we need to acknowledge that and honor it and listen to Indigenous people who have a lot to say and a lot to share in terms of wisdom on how to go forward. Because what we see is that the mainstream way of agriculture is changing. And I was very encouraged by a recent summit from our state university on soil health, which was actually funded by the soil health program in New Mexico, which is very satisfying. But basically every speaker was saying agriculture is changing, not will change or has to change. No, agriculture is changing. And that is really, really encouraging. And I believe that policy can get ahead of this change and be a catalyst for it. And that we as advocates on the ground, that we should seize that moment. So thank you.
Thank you, Isabella. Our next speaker hails from the Midwest and the state of Illinois. My friend, Liz Moran-Stelk, is the executive director of the Illinois Stewardship Alliance and is a veteran organizer with experience in sustainable agriculture policy and building powerful organizations. While now in Illinois, Liz previously served as the Ag and Food Regional Organizer with the Western Organizations of Resource Councils right here in Billings, Montana, where she worked with farmers and ranchers in 7 Western states on local, state, and federal food and agricultural policy. She formerly organized healthcare workers with SEIU Healthcare Illinois and has led field work for a variety of grassroots and electoral campaigns. Liz and the Illinois Stewardship Alliance work to pass multiple soil health policies there and are very involved in a variety of ongoing policy and coalition efforts in the Midwest. Liz, it's great to see you again. Take it away.
Thanks, Steve. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Hi there. I'm Liz Moran-Stelk in Chicago. I serve as the executive director of a statewide alliance of farmers and eaters called the Illinois Stewardship Alliance. I'm going to share a bit today about our experience organizing farmers to shift state policy to support building soil health, what policies we pursued and how and why state policy is one powerful tool for building soil health. But first, I want to tell you about Kathy and Rick Kasibir, who run a diverse livestock and grain operation together in central Illinois. They are the most charming couple. They're always laughing and smiling, and they finish each other's sentences. Rick is a big burly guy, but if there is a baby in the room, he is going right to that baby to hold it. They're 5th generation on the farm, and farming has supported their parents and grandparents and generations before them. But a few years ago, Kathy started to wonder why, unlike past generations, she and Rick both needed off-farm jobs to make ends meet. She then started to learn about soil health and regenerative agriculture. It looks like folks can't see the slides. Let me just take a second and check. Can you folks see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. Kathy, a few years ago, started to learn about soil health and regenerative agriculture. And Kathy talks about how they came to learn that modern, okay, thanks, Jeff. Just saying start. Oops. All right, having a little technical challenges here. Okay, so Ty, I may need your help. If you can.
Yeah, we're good now, Liz.
I can show you my slides, but I can't see my notes. Sorry for the interruption. Should I carry on?
Yeah, Ty's working on it here.
Okay, well, while he's doing that, I will carry on just a bit to keep the time going along. And then forgive me for the error here. Okay, stop screen. Okay, thank you, team. All right, well, this is 2020 where anything can happen. And if you could move back one slide, Ty, I would appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Okay, so Kathy talks about how they came to learn about modern farming practices had separated crops and livestock. And in the Midwest, we've taken down all the fences to make room for massive 24-row planters. Farmers were encouraged to buy more inputs from chemical and seed companies, and they really became reliant on the recommendations from retailers and companies to make it work. Their farm incomes have stayed flat while agribusiness profits have skyrocketed. And the impacts of not keeping money in our communities has been really clear. Small farms have gone out of business, our main streets are struggling, schools and churches have fewer people. And for Kathy and Rick, investing in soil health with cover crops and adding livestock started to save them a ton of money. They spend far less on fertilizer, insecticide, fungicide, and seed treatments. And this year will be the first that they use no chemical inputs. We met Kathy when she was at the start of her soil health journey. We had a farmer on staff who provided training and education on conservation practices for farmers like her. But a few years ago, we came to realize upon reflection that our education and with farmers on conservation practices alone wasn't going to be enough to make the change that we needed fast for soil health. So we knew we needed to do more to get at the root cause of unhealthy soil. We needed more public incentive to help farmers make the transition. We needed different policies, and we knew that with farmer leadership, we could help foster new champions for soil health among state and federal leaders. So we went to farmers we had a relationship with through our conservation program like Kathy, and we asked, do you want to use your voice to scale up soil health? And Kathy and Rick were all in. They wanted other farmers in Illinois to feel as inspired by and making more profits from soil health like they were. And we have our work cut out for ourselves here. In Illinois, we need healthy soil because we're trying to solve what scientists call a wicked problem, which is the massive dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. Ty, next slide. Our state, next slide, please. Our state has 52 watersheds, and all but one flow down to the Gulf of Mexico. So basically every drop of rain that hits farmland in Illinois takes with it soil, if it's not covered, and nutrients into our rivers and streams. Those nutrients are supposed to fertilize farm ground, but they're also fertilizing algae in the water, and it causes big growths that can suck up all the oxygen in the water and create hypoxic zones where nothing can live. The dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico happens from runoff. This is the whole watershed of the Mississippi River. Look at all of the places where runoff is flowing off of farmland and down into the Gulf of Mexico. The dead zone is about the size of New Jersey in the Gulf. And the US EPA took action a few years ago requiring states all along the Mississippi to make a plan for how they would reduce runoff. In Illinois, the problem isn't just downstream. It's not just in the Gulf. Last December, the town of Mount Pulaski, that's the star on this map, and it's not far from Rick and Kathy's farm. They put out an alert that municipal water was a danger to infants because of nitrates in the water from runoff. Those same headlines you'll see from Madison, the suburbs of Madison, to Minnesota, and south all along the Mississippi. And Illinois and Iowa are the worst contributors. So to meet our state's nutrient loss reduction strategy goals, farmers need to move from just 3% of cover crops to 90% on 23 million acres of farmland. 3 to 90%, that's a massive change. So we got the soil health champions together to figure out what are some solutions that we could do. Next slide. There's, that's Rick, moving cows. So the soil health group evaluated what other states were doing. We used the resources created by the National Healthy Soils Policy Network and by Wayne and the team at the Soil Health Institute. We wanted to do what Isabel in New Mexico called earlier, copy and paste from other states. They wanted to advocate for policy that had the most potential to get more cover crops on the ground. And so a committee of 3 farmers researched what other states had done so that they could make a recommendation to the rest of the group. They decided on some criteria that we would use to evaluate the state policies. As they read and discussed these, they asked, 1, will it actually increase adoption of soil health practices? 2, is it realistic and winnable? Is it something that we could put a gold star on? That was how they described it. We drew a lot of stars on our notes. Is it something that would set us up for the next step so that we could do even more? And in front with those criteria, there were 4 ideas that rose to the top. The first was to require conservation practices on the 65,000 acres of publicly leased farmland in Illinois. So in our state, we have a ton of public land that's rented to farmers. Much of it is along really sensitive areas like waterways and parks and schools, but we require no conservation practices to protect those resources. So in this way, the state is like an absentee landlord, where in Illinois, 65% of rented farmland in our state is mostly absentee landlords that live in other places like Chicago. But we now know that lease agreements for farmland can include conservation requirements. Also, we wanted the state to be a good landowner. Another idea that rose to the top was to make soil health an explicit goal of county soil and water conservation districts. So there was a bill that would amend our state's Soil and Water Conservation District Act to define soil health in statute and make it clear that building healthy soil is in the public interest. The third was to fully fund soil and water conservation districts and the conservation infrastructure. You know, the Department of Ag in our counties had faced big cuts during a very massive state budget impasse, but and they were already operating at half capacity. So we knew that in order for farmers to even, you know, get federal programs, that we had to have people there to help them. And the group was most impressed with a pilot program across the river in Iowa that provides a $5 per acre reward on crop insurance premiums for every acre with a cover crop. The idea also had some momentum from American Farmland Trust and the Natural Resource Defense Council. However, we knew it was really bold to ask for funding in a state that was just recovering from a massive budget crisis, and that it would take soil health champions sharing their stories to agency officials, appropriators, the governor's budget staff, and farmers and eaters who could take action. We decided to move forward to educate and encourage lawmakers to support all 4 policies, but we prioritized the campaign around the crop insurance reward program, which met all 3 criteria and it had momentum. So Kathy and the soil health champions developed a campaign in coalition with AFT in the Midwest and our conservation partners. Next slide. We knew that getting on the opinion pages was a really critical way to reach decision makers. So we strategized to draft op-eds from farmers that would run in key legislative districts, and other farmers would respond with the letters to the editors to keep soil health in the conversation. In her local paper, Kathy wrote a really powerful op-ed. She said that her family has been farming as long back as anyone can remember, but it bothered her that, as I mentioned, they needed off-farm jobs to make a living when they were both working twice the ground that her parents and grandparents did. The answer, she wrote, was just under their feet. She talks about the changes that they made on their soil health journey by diversifying the corn and bean operation with wheat, cattle, sheep, chickens, and honeybees, and adding cover crops to wean off pesticides and herbicides. She wrote, "Our yields are steady, we're saving money, and we're having more fun farming than we have in years." Her story and the letters that came in after that really paid off. In the last week of the spring legislature, the governor and lawmakers appropriated $300,000 for the fall covers for spring savings program. The program would fund 50,000 acres of cover crops in Illinois. The applications went live in December. We hit the 50,000 acre cap in just 7 days. There were 136,000 acres applied from 212 operators, and 70% were first-time cover crop users. Their cover crops will keep about 4,000 truckloads. Next slide, actually, thanks, Ty. Their cover crops will keep 4,000 truckloads of sediment out of our waterways and remove the carbon dioxide equivalent of 5,000 cars from the road. So, the most important part is this program is going to be named on every crop insurance bill in the state, which will also drive questions from farmers about crop insurance and undermine the myth that cover crops can risk your crop insurance. The governor's budget this year called for doubling the program, but it only included level funding. How did we do this? Next slide. A few actions we took over the last few years to win. We do legislative farm tours like this one hosted by Steve, who's in the top left on a blazing hot summer day. We chose to stay inside and eat homemade ice cream that his wife had made. Around the table is a state senator, agency staff, a staffer from a congressman on the House Ag Committee, the Illinois Environmental Council. And all along, we've been identifying leaders and inviting them to join and host farm tours. We had a soil health summit like this, but our secret sauce is farmer leaders that is backed by a broad base of eaters like me who are willing to take action on these issues. And to get them to help them understand these issues, we need to make it plain as day. So one of the ways we do that is we rely on metaphors that people can relate to. Next slide. One I really love is, and that we often use, was developed by D.D. Pershhouse, the founder of Land and Leadership Initiative. Healthy soil is like a sponge that can soak in and hold water, like sliced bread. The yeast in bread is what makes it spongy. It's like glue that holds the bread together, and yeast is the same kind of microbes that we have in healthy living soil. So imagine for a second if I poured a cup of water on the slice of bread, the bread would soak it up like gravy and not run off the side. You would see water coming out of the bottom, and if you stuck your finger on it, it would feel squishy. Now imagine if I pour that same water on a pile of flour, what's going to happen? The water is going to pile up. Most of it will run down the sides quickly, taking some flour with it, and water is not going to infiltrate the middle, and it won't filter down and replenish underground aquifers. So when it rains on conventionally tilled farm ground, rainwater hits the ground, it runs off, it carries soil and chemicals, and we're losing about 4 tons of topsoil per acre per year. But if we want to expand the soil health movement, we need to make these ideas accessible to folks who don't get to work farm ground. And as public officials, their job is to solve problems. In Illinois, we're trying to solve our water quality problem. And we want to make sure that when they're solving that, the ideas of soil health as a solution are on the table. A few decades ago, we all know now there was a massive coordinated effort to push back against climate science, and it's taking decades to reverse the damage that's been done. With so many farmers beginning to question the efficacy of synthetic chemicals, it's just a matter of time before we could see the same kind of coordinated effort to undermine the ideas of soil health from a handful of companies who make and sell chemicals. And policymakers need to hear from farmers who support them. Next slide. So we know we need every tool in our toolbox to build soil health, and quickly. At the Alliance, we see policy as a tool. It's a means and an end, because we know that it can actually make real change, like build soil health, water quality, climate resilience. It can help us grow the organization and build a base. And it can also drive a conversation about soil health and water quality that really reaches people. And all of this together builds power. And we know that if we want to make these big changes, we're going to need power in order to do it. Next slide. There's real urgency to do this. This is Steve Buxton. He's chair of our Soil Health Caucus. He's a 4th generation farmer in Central Illinois. Last year, he lost his 30-year-old daughter, and he lost his mother to cancer. And his fear is that it was exposure to chemicals on the farm that sickened them. And so he's transitioned to organic farming and has been using soil health practices. When he shares his story, he talks about his faith, that he has a calling to take care of the land and leaving it healthier and better for the next generation. Advocating for soil health asks people to have faith. You have to believe that the actions you're taking above ground are going to have an impact below the ground in ways you may never be able to see. And the best way for building faith in people like me, who don't get to work the land every day, are farmers like Steve Buxton and ranchers like Steve Charter, openly sharing their story from the heart about why they've chosen this path and the difference that they can see. And when they have the courage to speak up and people like me back them, we can have the power we need to protect the land to feed us for generations. Liz Stelk, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share our soil health organizing story.
Thank you, Liz. Unfortunately, we're running a little behind on time, and our keynote speaker can only be with us for a short time, so we're going to have to forego our question and answer session. Nevertheless, we invite you to still submit your questions to the question and answer feature, and our speakers will try to get them with brief typed answers.
Okay, hi everybody. Can you guys hear me? Hopefully you guys can.
Yes, we can.
Oh, great, thanks, Steve. Yeah, so I'll just, thanks for that warm welcome, and I'll just follow up by saying I got to go out to Steve's farm last year on my journey across the U.S., looking at the barriers for farmers and producers across the U.S. to adopt more sustainable regenerative practices, and got to spend time with Steve, and then also a bunch of different producers across Montana. So Really appreciate that time. And like Steve said, this journey it started because I've been working closely with a lot of the funders across the food and ag system. And help chair for funders for regenerative agriculture. And we're looking at the different financial strategies and ways we can fund a more sustainable regenerative system. So this journey last year, talking with hundreds of producers in almost every state, we really are trying and attempting to work with funders, both philanthropic and impact investment funders, to look at this as a system, and that there's a multitude of challenges that our producers are facing, and that if we see it as a system, how do we really work towards alleviating these challenges and opening up pathways to realize a more regenerative, more sustainable system. So today I'll talk a little bit about the financing and capital challenges that our producers are facing, because that's one of the main barriers that we're diving into as in the funding sector. Like how do we build and support some more blended, innovative capital structures that help funders get access to capital that they need, and then that capital is flexible and adaptive to their particular needs in their communities, on their landscape, in their ecosystem. And this report, I will add, we are able to share that publicly. It's a 200-page report that we're putting out. And then we'll be continuing to iterate on as new initiatives and work emerges across the space. We'll dive into this critical capital barrier that I want to talk with you all about today. And I think, it's no surprise that, in that process, we really have seen that the current financing that we have available to producers is super limited and perpetuates an extractive system. A lot of the traditional ag lending that we're seeing out there, 10-month operating loans, our crop insurance or subsidies are all pretty restricted to the conventional industrial ag system. So innovation is really cash limited across the states. Producers are saddled with debt, and crop insurance obligations reinforce this broken system. There's huge challenges across the space as far as farmland asset financing. As our farmland gets so expensive, it far exceeds the value that could be made on most landscapes for ecological food production. So a lot of producers we interviewed and talked with across the sector, across the landscape, are relying on off-farm income to make ends meet. And then there's huge equity challenges as far as BIPOC farmers, young beginning farmers to access land. And our current crop insurance models, no surprise to you all, really favor and most of that money goes towards large monocropped or CAFO systems. So the largest farms are getting the majority of that funding, and we're certainly seeing that with the relief bills that are coming out. So how do we really get capital to flow to small, mid-sized farmers, family farmers, and folks who are taking a risk and doing something different and exploring a different system? In this process last year, since doing this work, we get hundreds of emails from farmers and ranchers across the landscape regularly, monthly, asking where they can access capital, flexible capital that they need to do different, to innovate and be creative on their landscape. So the common financing options that that are out there, that you all, I'm sure, see and know, we have our traditional ag lenders or farm credit agencies across the U.S., and then, the traditional ag lending banks, Rabo AgriFinance, Compeer Financial. The two in red are the only two ag lenders currently in the U.S. that are experimenting or trying any sort of innovative financing tools. The Rabo AgriFinance has developed an organic loan, a transition loan or financing program, but it's very small. And I would actually say that right now they're not putting a lot of energy into it, and also really failing to pair that with technical assistance financing and other work to get that loan out there in the community. So very limited on the traditional ag lender side. And when we look at the other two, the other options at a national level, we have the NRCS, the Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP, and the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP. So most of you are probably familiar with these two NRCS programs that you can access financing from these two programs for different conservation practices and implementation of those practices. The challenge, with NRCS and the USDA programs is that a lot of these programs are so competitive in the current by producers in sufficient numbers that it's really untenable for a lot of smaller family farms to obtain this funding and to financially invest in these new practices. Growers on average for the NRCS funding are co-investing around 50% for each enhancement. So, and then I'd say another challenge with the NRCS programs is they're often not fine-tuned to a farmer's particular situation. Payments for conservation practices generally do not change depending on the farmer's location, surroundings, and because the public and environmental benefits of conservation and regenerative agriculture vary widely across different locations and ecosystems, we really need to develop some lending tools and financing that are regionally specific, that are adaptable, that are centered around the producer's needs in a particular area and are influenced and designed by producers as to what they need and what kind of capital and the terms that they need the capital to be in. So the current NRCS funding won't be enough to mitigate our challenges from climate change and restore landscapes. We did a lot of research last year and worked with different folks, especially the Croatan Institute and Delta Institute. They put out a report called Soil Wealth, which I highly recommend everyone reads. It's identifying over 70 capital tools that would help unlock capital into the regenerative ag and soil health. And it's going to take over $700 billion in estimated net capital over the next 30 years to really change our current system and finance a different system. So we need to think about, meeting this moment, what we need. And I think it's really critical that we think about new lines of capital that subvert these systems, that offers farmers the freedom to break out of the current industrial reality, and allowing capital to flow back to our land and our rural communities, enabling farmers to steward the soil and produce healthy food. Current structures just are not enough and do not allow for that. So, today we'll look at a few emerging models. There's a lot going on in financing in this sector, and I'd say a lot of it's pretty nascent and continuing to emerge regularly. On the smaller local scale, we're seeing a lot of CDFIs, so community development financial institutions, that are, emerging, that are 100% dedicated to delivering this responsible, affordable lending in their communities. There's not many CDFIs currently in the US that are focused on ag lending and their ag community, but we are seeing leaders across the CDFI space that are providing some really innovative capital, everything from farmland asset financing to operating loans, really longer term or low interest operating loans. So California Farmland, Virginia Food Shed Capital, Vermont Community Loan Fund, the Indigenous or Intertribal Ag Council has launched a pretty innovative CDFI, the Acapton Fund, and CEI Maine. Those are some of the leading CDFIs. And a lot of that takes hard work and partnering with your local current CDFI lenders to get them to engage with their ag community and develop some loan tools or operating loans or farmland asset financing tools in their ag community. So in Montana, the first ag-focused CDFI was approved in 2012, the Native American Community Development Corporation. And they're mostly focused on Native communities in Montana, but their easy guarantee loans are also available to all eligible agricultural producers statewide. So, these types of models we're seeing emerge and really need to scale and have CDFIs adopt more agricultural lending more broadly across the US. And on other local, smaller scales, a lot of, community food coalitions like Community Food and Agricultural Coalition, CFAC, which is based in Missoula. They are focused on strengthening, a lot of food coalitions across the U.S. and in their local community are really focused on strengthening the food system. And we're seeing a lot of food coalitions like this put out some mini grants. So, CFAC has a $5,000 mini grant for farmers to grow and diversify, especially crop in Missoula area around in the surrounding region. So we're seeing a lot of these smaller local scale financing tools pop up. And then I think, what we're also seeing is, like I mentioned earlier, farmland asset financing has become a big challenge and an area of interest for funders across the space. And how do we ensure farmers can stay on the land or transition their land or get access to new land in a way that's sustainable and affordable to all producers? And there's a lot of emerging models that are interesting. There are community land trusts that are developing. So agrarian trust is probably the most advanced national model in exploring partnering with Trust Montana on how to develop a commons model for land, a community land trust. They, through lease restrictions and agricultural easements on the land it owns, agrarian trust can remove barriers to owning land, require organic farming practices, and maintain affordability for future farmers. Agrarian trust is purchasing capital to purchase land or raising capital to purchase land, but a lot of the land is being donated, or they're working with farmers who are in transition to help them, those retiring farmers, partner with beginning and under-resourced farmers to receive a fair price for the land and offer these long-term leases to new farmers. Another model we're seeing emerge are these real estate investment trusts. So Iroquois Valley Farmland is a real estate investment trust that's working nationally to offer affordable leases and mortgages to certified organic and transitioning farmers. And I know that in Northern Montana, farmer and innovator Anna Jones Crabtree, who is an awesome person and leader, that I would highly recommend folks reach out to and talk to, exploring a lot of these different models for financing. But she's been working with Iroquois Valley for several years on some of the farmland asset financing and affordable leasing. So, those are, both pretty, new concepts are taking, they're growing pretty rapidly in how we think about this farmland asset financing. Iroquois Valley's been around for a lot longer, and I think there's a lot more interest in how we fund and support access to farmland and long-term leases. Another model is these rural investment cooperatives. There's a few of these that are pretty innovative that we're seeing emerge. Pooter Valley Community Farms in Colorado is an excellent model. And basically it's a multi-stakeholder co-op that purchases farmland to provide long-term tenure for farmers. So members in the co-op invest in tangible assets such as farmland, affordable housing, historic buildings, and the investment co-op leases its land or equipment assets at a favorable terms to increase success for the farmers without expecting a major return, especially over the short term. So there's no expectation of huge returns over the short term. And so members of the co-op, even if they're not wealthy investors, they're often local community investors and members, are really able through this model to help revitalize their rural community. And there's a rural investment cooperative in Montana, the Farmland Investment Company in Montana, providing capital for farmers in the Bitterroot Valley, 5-year lease-down contracts to begin new farmers. So it's really allowing them to gain the operational experience necessary to qualify for other financing. So those are some of the sort of the shorter or like smaller scale financing things we're seeing emerge, and then some of the farmland financing that we're seeing emerge. One other interesting concept we've looked at a lot over the last year is grass banks, And a grass bank is a piece of land where pasture is leased to multiple ranchers for a reduced rate, and ranchers earn reduced grazing fees on shared land by implementing certain conservation practices on their private land. When an ACES group in Montana is developing a grass bank, and I know they're in the process of that and also funding it. But these are interesting models for managing both conservation and community. So helping benefit the wildlife and natural resources, but also increasing economic opportunities for the ranching communities. I'd say on a larger scale, and I think you guys all heard from Robin probably earlier today, I think that's right. But we're seeing some more national lender, loan models develop and that are really exciting. So this is on a larger scale. We're seeing folks like Replant Capital. So that's the group that Robin is one of the founders of, providing farmers with low-cost loans to transition. And I think what's critical about some of these tools we're seeing develop is that not only should we be providing these low-cost loans to transition, but also that funding is prepared with TA funding to provide support and capacity for farmers in transition, and then also partnerships with some of the larger companies, some of the brand partnerships that can provide offtake contracts and long-term commitments to farmers in the program. So another model of this is a perennial fund, Matt Ag. Jill Taylor and his team at Matt Ag, based in Colorado, but they're working nationally. Really focused on enabling farmers to transition using creative debt structures paired with fully integrated technical assistance. Again, that technical assistance being key, business planning and access to markets. They're really looking at providing operating capital to farmers so that they can move through that 3-year gap of transition. And these low interest or long-term loan structures. So both of those models, we're starting to see those types of funds emerge. I know Perennial Fund in particular has an open application process. I think right now they have more demand than they can actually meet. And so it just goes to show that there's huge latent demand for this type of patient, flexible capital design to really support a farmer throughout the process, not just with funding, but with technical assistance, business planning, and access to markets. So, we hope to see these funds grow, and that some of the work that we're continuing to do on the funding side is how do we, engage and work with more investors and funders to put capital into these structures. Another model that we're seeing, explored widely across the space, and I think Lil is probably on the call today, but with Western Sustainability Exchange, this concept of carbon credits and ecosystem service payments. How do we pay farmers to beyond just profit and yield? And I think that's a big question. How do we support and reward farmers for their work on the landscape that moves beyond this model of, strictly profit and yield off the landscape? How do we support their work as far as soil carbon, water infiltration, biodiversity, other public ecosystem benefits that our producers are providing to all of us? So Western Sustainability Exchange is exploring this program, paying farmers to sequester carbon using rotational grazing practices, working with Native Energy on a way to sell carbon credits through that program. So there's a lot of other groups across the U.S. looking at this. NORI is another group that's looking at paying farmers for carbon credits. And I think, this particular issue of how do we, pay farmers for ecosystem services is still evolving. And I think we're going to see a lot of different groups exploring ways to do this in the coming years. But there are opportunities to explore this based on your landscape and what you're doing and the partnerships you have. And I think we're also seeing that a lot of farmers and producers are partnering with brands. Brands like Danone, General Mills. I would say General Mills is probably taking the most progressive, or one of the more progressive stances on how they really do this and support farmers in their supply chain, but also outside of their supply chain. Applegate, Patagonia, there's many, many more, but brands really making commitments. I think the impetus for brands we're seeing is they're making commitments on climate and carbon in their own supply chains. So as part of this commitment, looking at their supply chain and the sourcing and what's going on at the production level, much more focused on production practices as opposed to food miles. So, you know, we're seeing brands provide capital and support to manage the transition. Folks like Danone, they're coming to farmers and giving them all the technical and capacity funding and support they need as they transition. So that's going to be interesting to see brands continue to emerge that are actively, you know, working towards these goals and how they will partner with farmers and producers long term. I think right now it's a lot of it is a focus on, you know, their particular supply chains, but hope to see that evolve into working with larger groups and communities of producers. I think, you know, overall, when we think about financing strategies right now, what's available to farmers and producers outside of the current traditional models, you know, a lot of the farmers that we've worked with are really having to stack these financial tools because there's limited capital in the space currently. So this is just one example from farmer that we're working with, but you know, piecing together financing that looks like conservation easements, agency funding from federal farm programs, CSA program, loans from traditional lenders, grass banking, and creative partnerships with nonprofit groups and brands. So a lot of stacking of different tools that will get them the capital they need to really be innovative and support regenerative ag or sustainable ag conservation practices on their landscape. I think what's really critical to call attention to is that a lot of the, you know, when we work with farmers across space, whether we're, you know, funders for regenerative ag or other groups that, you know, funders and folks that we're working with, the local, you know, organizations that are there to support you guys, they are going to be your best link to support on whether it's, you know, EQIP funding, some of the NRCS funding, or understanding local opportunities for funding, some of that smaller scale funding, or opportunities to partner with CDFIs locally to develop some loan programs for your ag lending. So folks like Farmland, Montana, you know, Northern Plains, which you guys are all here today, great resource in Western Sustainability Exchange, Western Landowners Alliance, a lot of groups in Montana that are working to support their local producers. So those are going to be, you know, we've often seen like that's the best TA that, you know, and guidance that producers can get and really help organize around some of these new models for financing. And the other thing, you know, I think is really critical at the state level, we're seeing across the states work across building soil health programs, and that's really going to unlock capital for farmers and producers that are working towards soil health or towards regenerative practices. There's a national Healthy Soil Network, and so CalCan and folks in California have really led the way on that, but they are working with over 17 states now on healthy soil programs that will fund and support farmers as they transition and work on healthy soil practices. I think in Montana, it's critical, you know, and I know Northern Plains is working on this, but critical that we reach out to our representatives, or that you all reach out to your representatives and your industry groups in the state, really pushing them to explore how to finance healthy soils and work on the healthy soil state policy and other policies that will reward cover cropping or water, a lot of ways to tie in financing at the state level. And then one final thing I'll add is this, as the financing options really are evolving constantly and people are working on this, you know, this is what we're working on every, you know, day to day, and especially as we, you know, work from that report that over the last year, you know, we're focused on some of the financing and policy options. And as these things continue to evolve, we will certainly be trying out different financing tools and helping to get those out as much as we can. And one financing tool that we are exploring right now is a national soil bank, a national green bank for that's focused on regen ag that we're in the early stages of exploring and putting together with some investors on how do we provide and unlock a lot of capital to producers across the space. And so we're looking at this model of a national bank that can provide guarantee loans, forgivable loans, community bonds, other really flexible, innovative capital tools that can flow directly to producers on the landscape and help unlock and de-risk other more traditional financing. So we're going to need to see, that level of financing come together and large investment to flow directly to producers. So a lot of this stuff is continuing to emerge, and happy to talk and share, any of the financing tools that we know of and are working on as they emerge with any of you. So I'll just stop there, and I'm happy to continue to chat about financing anytime.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. And now we'll be having the question and answer session with Jennifer. Stepping back in to moderate our question and answer session is John Jugan. John, take her away.
Thanks, Steve. I have a variety of questions for you, Jennifer. Thanks for your time. This one came early on in your presentation. The question is from an anonymous attendee, and you may have already answered it, but who are the funders? I'm not sure if that means for your organization or for ag producers, but are there additional funding sources you want to mention or clarify?
Yeah, I mean, the funders right now, the funders I work with, so I mostly work with, your philanthropic funders on the grant side, but also impact investors. So, I mean, I'd say the majority of funders that we are working with on a regular basis are more on the impact investment side and the philanthropic side. I would say that the interest from traditional investors is not huge right now. So I think right now it's more about exploring models that will work, developing lending tools, and piloting those in different regions and areas to show different risk calculations, different loan structures, how they worked, to hopefully make an influence longer term on some of the structures with our farm credit agencies and other ag lenders who can reevaluate their own risk models and their own lending structures based on that.
Thank you. Another question, maybe a different anonymous attendee, maybe the same one. You suggested in your talk that the NRCS conservation funding is insufficient. This attendee asks, would improve NRCS conservation program funding and reform essentially fill the gap, or do we need these local efforts or other efforts to get this done?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, NRCS funding is, I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve NRCS funding. We're seeing some improvement, like beginning farmer loans and increased capital in those programs. I think it's going to come down to a huge amount of effort to make some changes in the Farm Bill and other programs to unlock current capital. There's some capital in USDA that just sits there currently that's not being deployed to especially small family farmers. There's all to say there's a lot of potential for NRCS funding to expand and also to incorporate more regenerative practices. The NRCS, our NRCS and our RCDs, our rural conservation districts, these folks that are on the landscape that are out there to support producers. I think there's a lot of opportunity to provide more capacity and support to those folks to understand emerging practices and what kinds of capital tools could be deployed to help those practices, So I think the NRCS has an opportunity to really evolve and advance. I think that's going to be a little bit long term, and we're going to have to make some changes in Farm Bill financing opportunities. And so some of that's long term. And so I think in the immediate time frame, until we have a very different political climate and will to take on some of the funding structures at USDA, we're going to have to. There's a huge amount of capital that we need to unlock and flow through, in addition to what the NRCS would be able to provide. That's to provide the right types of loan structures, flexible capital at the local level. And I think, we work on policy a lot. I think, we just unfortunately see that at the national scale, like the policy is just going to be slow to change and incremental. And so I think there's just a huge need to unlock some other financing tools that can really catalyze the system, and also develop models that work, that show that we can finance our producers in a different way, and we can support them in the process. And we can also create new risk models and value what they're doing beyond profit and yield, and we can finance that.
Thank you. The next question is from Chuck Eisenhart, and this is to you, Jennifer, and any of the other panelists. They probably won't have a chance to chime in now. Maybe they could type an answer. If a state had $12 million to invest in one or more programs to support young and beginning farmers in regenerative farming and leverage some of the emerging financial assets you are identifying, how would you allocate the $12 million? And Chuck has left an email as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think some of it, I think, is going to be critical around the farmland financing. I think when you look at young and beginning farmers, that's their, when we talk to farmers across the landscape, that's their number one challenge. If they are getting on the landscape, they're getting 1, 2 year, 3 year leases. It's very hard to establish a really sustainable practices on a piece of land when you're farming for 1, 2, 3 years. So the opportunities for young farmers of color, BIPOC farmers, Indigenous farmers, to really new farmers, women farmers, to get on the landscape are so limited. And with the aging population of our current producers, we really need to find transition opportunities, working with current farmers to develop relationships with new farmers, young farmers, transition some of that land, and develop long-term leasing programs with them. So I would look at a lot of that as an opportunity, because with young farmers and farmers who are looking to get on the land, I think there's a huge already a mindset in place of farming in a way that's sustainable and regenerative. So I think, getting those farmers on the land, working with farmers who are wanting to transition their land is one key piece that I would focus on.
Thank you. Here's a question from Bill Milton. Do you have some specific useful examples where regions/communities have stacked/leveraged financing tools as a collaborative co-op approach, building measurable changes versus an individual producer effort?
Yeah, we are seeing a lot of cooperative models emerge. And actually there's a webinar this week around some farmers of color coming together to establish a cooperative model. Groups like Black Farmers Fund, SAFON. We have a group in California called BIPOC Farmers. Those are just more, it's not just these groups, but there's a lot of groups focused on how do we develop these co-op models or work together. I'm on the California Holistic Grazers group, working with California producers or ranchers that are thinking about these models, especially in this moment of what's gone on with COVID. How do they come together to develop, co-op or model that allows them to, figure out shipping together and processing together that reduce costs for them. So I would just say I'm happy to email. So if I don't know if I can email some some of these webinars that we have coming up just around that subject, which I think would be the most useful, so you can hear directly from folks how they're setting that up or how they're thinking about it. So I'm happy to provide my email. I don't know the best way to do that. You guys can let me know to share that. I think that would be the most helpful.
I'm sure that some Northern Plains staff will make that available to any of the attendees. Thank you. I'm afraid we only have time for one more question. This is from Coulter Schroeder. As a new farmer, I find that my struggles all seem to come down to surviving long enough to become profitable. I am originally from a Montana farm and left for 13 years to generate capital for a regenerative ag operation. I lost my job this year with COVID, and we are fully invested into a 21-acre diversified small holding in Livingston, but we are currently financing everything ourselves, and it is a very dicey situation. No insurance and no income until next year. How can a new farmer identify the lowest hanging fruit for funding, as time is critical and there are many different grassroots funding with such low % of applications being funded?
Yeah. I mean, Coulter, I would just like, this is the sort of the impetus, you know, for us to focus on financing as, you know, coming out of this report. There are so many farmers that are in this situation that we get emails from regularly, and it's actually one of the main drivers for us to think about this national level bank on Regen Ag. How do we get more capital flowing to individual producers, small producers, family producers? That's just not happening at scale like right now. And I think, you know, Coulter identified that in his question. It's just, there's not enough capital that is available to small producers. I think some of the best things we're seeing are CDFIs in local communities and how those could be really built out. A national, you know, ideally we'd like to see a national group like in every state of CDFIs focused on their ag producers that can provide this like immediate capital that meet, you know, address these immediate capital needs. And some of the national bank structure we're working on is to flow guarantee loans to those CDFIs, you know, other kinds of forgivable loans and grant capital so that they can continue to scale what they're doing and provide 36-month operating loans. But right now we're just not, it's not there, and it's a real challenge. And so, yeah, I would just say to Coulter, I would also be happy to email or chat with you about, you know, what might be some immediate options. I think it's going to be different for every producer, and right now that's why that stacking or thinking about creative ways to get financing is critical. So yeah, I don't think there's any like easy answer right now. I think it's a lot. I mean, it's a big challenge, and yeah. So I would be happy to chat just about with Coulter if you want to email.
Thanks, Jennifer. Those are some good resources you've been discussing. All right, everyone, with that, we're going to wrap up our Q&A session. Thank you for your excellent questions. And thanks again to Jennifer for joining us today. We really enjoyed having you here. And with that, I'm going to switch the controls over to the head of the Soils Task Force, John Brown.
Oh, thanks. Great to be here, and thanks, John. Let's see here, get everything together. And thanks everyone for showing up today and all of the amazing speakers and information. Wow, I'm just blown away. My name is John Brown. I'm zooming into our summit today from Helena, Montana, and I'm a longtime member of Northern Plains. I currently sit on the organization's board of directors and originally from Circle, Montana.
Hey, John, switch on your camera.
Yeah, I think I just did. Did that work?
Don't see you.
I see. Yeah, there I am. Okay.
Yep, okay, great.
Okay, we're back to, so yeah, and on the board of directors. And after all of this information today, I'm even more interested in what's going on underneath our feet, and that in soil, we have a tremendous opportunity to restore our balance with nature, find solutions to the challenges we and the planet face. Now that we've had a chance to hear from all these speakers, I want to share with you the Northern Plains story of soil and how we got here, and talk about the road ahead. So about 5 years ago now, Steve and I was visiting him newly back to Montana, and we were bathed in the low early winter sunlight of his 40-year-old passive solar earth sheltered home. It's an amazing place. And I'm sure that many of you know the kind of light that I'm talking about here. It can send you drifting into new territory, right? Well, our imaginations were drifting to the well-being of our young grandchildren, both of us having had new ones. Becoming new grandparents has a way of shifting one's focus. Steve and I recognize we couldn't wait for experts to come around and give us the direction on what to do and how to take action to build more healthy soil and address climate change, climate crisis actually. Both of us like playing the part of agricultural citizen scientists, experimenting with how we can do a better job of managing livestock and landscape. And the stock we were beginning to focus on were the little ones under our feet, soil microbes. We weren't the first, but this was leading edge stuff, and it can get pretty lonely out on that sharp edge, we all know. And we suspected that there were others out there on the edges too, and even knew some of them. So we decided to see if we could gather a group of these people together and share stories and give one another support. As Steve mentioned earlier today, we held our first Northern Plains Soil Summit in 2016. And thanks to the amazing work of Eamon Heberlin and Maggie Gordon, our fantastic organizers, we had great turnout for that event. And that experience showed us that many other folks in Montana were interested in soil health and were actively engaged in doing what they could. Everyone was really happy and relieved to know there were others out there and they weren't alone. So several specific Northern Plains committees emerged out of that event, and some of them are even active today. In particular, one of them was a soil health committee made up of Northern Plains members like Steve and myself. And one of our initial efforts was to expand the soil network we started building on that first summit. A few local community nodes informally gathered in living rooms around the state to talk with peers about what worked and what didn't. No one had to travel more than 100 miles, and everyone benefited from these meetings. And it was really great not to have to pack up and go 300 or 400 miles to a meeting. Some of these gatherings happened out in the field too, literally. In and around pits we dug that showed soil and root profiles. We now call these farm tours soil crawls. The first one was held on Steve's ranch, and we have since held about 2 or 3 every summer from Red Lodge to Square Butte, well, except for, sadly, for this year. These crawls draw folks from all over to see what is and was happening below the surface, to develop a deeper appreciation for soil microbes. These events also gave us producers the opportunity to talk about practices and allow ourselves to be vulnerable in front of our peers. On top of that, these events were wonderful community builders. And we wrote letters to the editor and op-eds and newspaper and magazine articles about soil. Steve and I presented what we knew and hoped to know at several events around the state and region. Sometimes we presented as a team and sometimes as individuals. Other committee members attended local soil conservation working groups and to give input and direction. And those events helped our committee members grow, and that process is not complete yet. We continue to host soil crawls, and we're working to build alliances throughout the state, region, and country, and now globally with this event, and with the intention of participating in discussions around local and state policy, as well as federal farm bills. And now our committee, which has since evolved into a task force at Northern Plains and is staffed by the superhuman Ty Kester, and who took over the impossible role from Maggie, we've begun working to develop soil health policy in Montana. And over the past year, we've helped convene a statewide working group, bringing together organizations from across Montana interested in soil health and exploring the possible options for policy changes. Now, most recently, Northern Plains, as a member of Grow Montana Food Policy Coalition, has worked to develop a study bill requesting that the legislature assign the topic of establishing a state soil health program to a legislative committee with the participation of scientists and experts for further study. This bill would get the state to develop soil health solutions and programming that are most suitable for Montana. Montana's state code already identifies soil preservation as necessary to protect and promote the health, safety, and general welfare of Montanans. And the legislature has already determined that appropriate soil conserving land use practices be adopted and carried out. But no state agency in Montana currently has responsibility for soil health, leaving producers to cobble together assistance and funding and from private and federal sources to make soil health improvements. And furthermore, the agencies themselves could use clarity on which among them should even have the responsibility. The Soil Health Study Bill will help Montana take the first steps toward assisting producers to adopt soil health practices. It'll also take steps toward clarifying for state agencies which among them should have responsibility for soil health and how they may best coordinate with the NRCS and other entities working on it. Montana already has soil health success stories, people like Steve and others, and these innovative producers can be found across Montana. Many of them are Northern Plains members, but there are way too small a number of them. And we need to make soil health practices the norm, not the exception. Our efforts at introducing soil health policy, this study bill, aim to scale up soil health statewide. As we've seen already from our speakers today, this isn't new or risky. States across the country and counties and countries across the globe have already adopted policies that help our producers implement soil health. Not taking bold, clear action now is the risky choice. Clearly, the moment for soil health is now, and that begs the question, will we capture this moment? We need the help of Montanans, all Montanans, from all walks of life to get soil health policy on the books and on the landscape and in our hearts. So, what can you do to help? For starters, we need you to write letters to the editor or editorials in your hometown paper. We need you to talk to your local and state representatives that this is something you care about and support. And talk with your friends and neighbors. Soil health is something we all have in common. And you also can join our movement by becoming a member of Northern Plains if you aren't already. I think I just saw some dung beetle antennae wiggling there. I guess that means it's back to you, Steve.
Oh, thanks, John. Well, my antenna was definitely not wiggling. That was great. So that's right. For over 4 decades, everyday Montanans organized together as Northern Plains, have been fighting the good fight. At Northern Plains, we are from the plains and the mountains, cities and towns. We are everyday Montanans who love where we live. We stand shoulder to shoulder to protect this place we all call home. We believe that true prosperity begins with healthy soil, land, water, and air. We believe that our families, farms, ranchers, schools, businesses, governments, and communities thrive when we are good stewards of these resources. We believe that if we look beyond our fences, listen to one another, and keep our minds open, we will find the creative solutions to secure a clean, healthful environment for all. We are working toward a future where we live in harmony with nature, where our economy serves the people rather than the people serving the economy, where neighbors work side by side to build a world that lives up to our ideals of fairness, inclusion, and justice. To create this future, we must act now. The actions we take today will determine the world that our children and grandchildren inherit. Working together right now, we can ensure true prosperity for generations to come. To become a member, visit us at www.northernplains.org. Northern Plains is a grassroots organization, and we mean it. Our nearly 4,000 members across Montana elect and serve as our leadership, determine our strategy and direction on our issues, and carry out the work needed to protect the people and places we love. The only thing our 4,000 members have in common is they pay membership dues. General membership is $50 a year, but we know these are hard times, and we don't want money to discourage anyone from getting involved with Northern Plains. So whatever amount you feel you can contribute to become a member of Northern Plains, we'd be happy to have your support. Again, you can become a member at www.northernplains.org or follow the link in the chat. With that, goodbye, and we'll send you off for the afternoon. Thanks so much for attending.